One day, in the not so distant future, there's going to be a team of scientists and they're going to be studying something in Antarctica. And one of them is going to go on a dive and find a cave and do a little bit of exploring and come up in a place that's going to change the world forever. Because things are going to be seen and found that cannot be explained. In fact, we have it directly from the United States Air Force that this is the case. And I'm going to read a letter for you guys today from a lieutenant colonel from a while back who came into some information that was just inexplicable. People are going to look back historically and say, do you remember the time back when we thought Antarctica was completely uninhabited and had never been inhabited? And that we thought all of those things flying around in our skies were from other planets? Those people were pretty stupid. There's a question that no one seems to ask about this Piri-Reis map. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It was from the 1500s, and it seems to very accurately depict the coastline of Antarctica, free of ice, but it's from the 1500s. And according to mainstream science, there would have been no way to do such a thing in the 1500s because Antarctica was completely covered with sea ice, miles and miles and miles away from the actual shore. It was only the 1940s when they started doing seismographic research that they could shoot the waves down through the ice and see where the land was and where the water was, and then map the land that way. You see, they can't rectify these two things, but there is an explanation. But it would require mainstream science to admit that they've been wrong about something for a very, very long time. Now, this is the Piri-Reis map. It was a map that was created by an Ottoman captain many, many, many hundreds of years ago. And while he himself actually wasn't a world explorer, he was a collector of maps. And it's this little blurb over here to the right. And a lot of people have seen it, and it's been speculated about on a lot of TV shows, but there's a piece of information that a lot of people don't have, that the United States Air Force looked into this and realized they got it wrong. Now, of course, mainstream science has buried this, and I want to share it with you guys today. But as always, I never want to forget to say thank you to all of you who have joined us, the Florida Maquis Patreon channel. I wish things were the way they were back in 17 and 18, guys. I really do. You would have never heard me even think about setting up a channel back then. I could do videos 2, maybe 3 times a week and would get 70, 80, 90,000 views. Had 150, 130,000 subscribers. So that was pretty normal. But now, things have collapsed catastrophically. There was another major channel, I can't even mention the name, that got taken down today because I don't want to risk it, just even mentioning the name. So if you can, humbly, to help us out, $1 per month. It's the lowest allowable level over there. It's even less if you sign up for an entire year, fully refundable first 90 days. It's a private server, Vimeo. We can show things, talk about things that can't be seen by Google censors. And that's the reality over there. I know not everybody can afford it, but for $1, for 3 pennies a day, it's cheaper than just about anything. We do videos once a week. Once things get over there to where it's starting to have enough people that it's pushing away the YouTube audience, we'll go over there permanently with Antarctica, with Venezuela, with politics, all of it. So, but once again, those of you who have gone over there, thank you so much. There's a $1 level, a $5 level, discounts for signing up for an entire year. There's already almost 300 videos over there. Seriously. Almost 300 of them. 280 something, 290 something videos that you can go through and peruse. And it's fully refundable. First 90 days, no questions asked. You can have whatever you've put in back. Now, what am I talking about? U.S. Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, United States Air Force Commander, received a letter in 1960 on the 6th of July from a Professor Charles Hapgood from Keene College. And here's what he wrote. Dear Professor Hapgood, your request of evaluation of certain unusual features of the Piri-Reis Antarctica map of 1513 by this organization has been reviewed. Speaking of the United States Air Force, the claim that the lower part of the map portrays the Princess Martha coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, and the Palmer Peninsula is reasonable. We find that this is the most logical and, in all probability, the correct interpretation of the map. The geographical detail shown in the lower part of the map agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. This indicates the coastline has been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. This part of Antarctica ice-free. The ice cap in this region is now about a mile thick. We have no idea how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographical knowledge in 1513. Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, Lieutenant Colonel, USAF Commander. Now, I looked this guy up to see if this was just some make-believe thing. It's absolutely not. Colonel Harold Ohlmeyer, born 1 October 1919, Louisiana, died 22 September 2010, 90 years old. Just to give you an idea, this guy was not just your average, everyday, run-of-the-mill Air Force desk jockey. After returning from the war, Colonel Ohlmeyer completed many assignments around the world, retiring in 26 August 1968. It's 2 years before I was even born. He was retired. Colonel Ohlmeyer's final assignment was as Special Assistant to the Director for Satellite Programs of the Space and Missile Systems Organization. Colonel Ohlmeyer received the following awards and decorations: Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Air Medal with 4 Oak Leaf Clusters, Air Force Commendation Medal, Presidential Unit Citation with Oak Leaf Cluster, Air Force Outstanding Unit Award, American Campaign Medal, European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, National Defense Service Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, Air Force Longevity Medal with Silver Oak Leaf Cluster. His military flight ratings were Command Navigator Badge and Master Missileman Badge. So this guy was no joke. This guy was for sure real. Now, here's where we're going to put all these puzzle pieces together. We know the map is accurate. The Air Force commander has said the map is accurate. But you'd have to ask the question, how did ships with only 14th and 15th century technology navigate such difficult seas, even for modern ships? Going down in what they call the Roaring Forties is a crapshoot. The seas are incredibly rough. The winds are terrible, depending on when you go down there. In fact, even with the most modern technology, there are times when we can't access our own bases down there. How in the world did they do it 500 years ago if this were the case? Well, the map points to this. The map points to the fact that the ice wasn't there. A lot of people, and I've said this before, but I have to hammer the point home, a lot of people think Antarctica is frozen over and cold because it's at the South Pole. Partially, yes, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is this, what's on your screen. These weather patterns that surround it isolate it from any long-term warm air. Now, there are times when it's warmer than it is other times, but generally speaking, because of the swirling currents, if you take away the land bridge, if you restore the land bridge between the tip of South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, this all stops. And this area here would become a great deal more temperate. And that would allow for ships like this to be able to go down there. And they probably found things. They found things that would merit return trips. And here's the other part here that I think that's going to really, really blow your mind about this. These maps were not the result of a single expedition. Meaning one ship didn't go one time and then map all of everything that you see here on the right. That wasn't all done by one crew at one time, and then they returned with all the information, made the map. This would have been the result of multiple trips over and over and over and over and over again. Now, because of the state of technology, they just didn't have the ability to do then what we can do now. So if that's the case, the question you have to ask yourself is this. If this man, or whoever sent the expeditions down there, thought it was worth sending expeditions down there over and over and over again, it must have meant something to them. There must have been something found down there that was worth it. And this is not what we heard from Operation High Jump when they flew over and they said they saw vast swaths of habitable land, and they saw coal, and they saw all sorts of other things, huge mountains and, places to be explored, full of natural resources. That sounds a lot like what would inspire the 14th and 15th century explorers to return over and over and over and over again, that would give them the ability to make these detailed maps. And they returned over and over again, and each time there was no ice. Otherwise, they would not have been able to continue to make the maps. So this actually makes sense. This idea of, at one time, in a much more recent time, there being land in between the Antarctic Peninsula and the tip of Argentina that in some catastrophic event got washed away. And very recently, only not even 3 weeks ago now, we have this story we reported on yesterday, where they're saying because of varying temperatures, there are these underwater landslides that cause these massive tsunamis. That makes sense too. And that's very likely what was the case. And it wouldn't have caused a change in temperature right away, but remember what the whole premise of the series Game of Thrones was? Those of you who don't know what you're looking at in the map here. The map on the right is supposedly a make-believe fictitious map made for the series Game of Thrones based on the book Song of Ice and Fire. When you look at it closely, it very much looks like where Argentina and Chile meet Antarctica, which is just over here on the left, with just a giant chunk of land missing. The entire premise of that series, of that show, and I know it's Hollywood, but it was based on books that somebody wrote. Where did they get the idea? You see, I think they lifted an actual historical account and they told the story. The entire premise, winter is coming. The entire premise was they were in the summer of whatever season that they had in the show, and that everything was nice and wonderful, but winter is coming. That a great freeze was going to come. What if there were people here? What if they knew about this and they documented this? Something terrible had happened or was going to happen because maybe it had happened before. And this all got washed away. See, this is where we get the stories of giants from. Down here in the tip of South America, we've documented all sorts of pictures of things in Antarctica that look like giants. And this is from a different map maker. You see, this also makes sense to what they reported. There was this map they created back in the 1500s. It showed greenery and it showed forests, but it showed giants. And giants being chased by dragons. It's exactly what we saw in the show. And these things flying overhead. We have an area bigger than Australia, bigger than North America by far, and bigger than the entirety of Europe that is virtually completely unexplored. That at one time, science says, was a lush rainforest. Nowhere else in the world where there was a lush rainforest was there no habitation. And I put this picture together for a video some time ago, and a lot of people didn't get it. A lot of people didn't put it together. 3 of these images, lower left, lower center, upper right, artist's representation of what they call the grays. Things people have reported seeing, being abducted by. Top center and lower right, pictures from Antarctica using Google Earth Pro. No lie. No joke. We've shown them in multiple videos. You see, we have giants in the modern world. People that we look at and go, wow, they're really big. And to the medieval folks, they just said, oh, look, it's an elf and a giant, with no other context. That's probably how they would have described a picture like this. I was arm's length away, and I've talked about this before, and I know a lot of people think I'm kind of more than fascinated with it, but this was a life-changing moment for me. I was 17 years old, and I was arm length away from this man. And I had seen professional football players. I was a football player at the time. I had never seen a living human being that big in my life. And there's a lot of folks out there that have this misconception about Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant wasn't sickly like Wadlow was. He wasn't suffering from some disease like Wadlow was, where Wadlow could barely, the guy was 8'11", who could barely walk, and he was lop-footed and had to walk with a cane. Andre the Giant, this is him when he was just beyond high school age, 20-something. He was proportionate, and he was muscular, and he was strong. He didn't look out of proportion. If there weren't the girls here, you wouldn't think this. You'd think, well, it's kind of a big guy, but you wouldn't get a sense of how big he really was. What happened to Andre the Giant was this, is that Andre, because of what he got into, the entertainment industry, ate and drank himself to death. Basically, that's why he died so young. But he was something else. We see Wadlow was never healthy. Wadlow could have never gotten into a ring and even pretended to be a wrestler. He could barely function in his daily life. And I love this picture with Ali, because it shows how big the man's hands were, how they were just a completely different thing than even Ali. He was just another level. There's so many pictures of him standing next to Hulk Hogan that are out of context, and people don't realize how big Hulk Hogan is. And I thought I would bring up this picture. What's Trump? 6'1", 6'2"? Maybe with his shoes on, 6'3"? Hogan looks down to him like he's a little kid. And Andre the Giant looks at him like he's a little brother. I mean, not even, it wasn't even close. This man, and the thing is, you hear him, and that's the thing, I heard him speak. There's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it. And there was a historical account, I wish I'd have brought it up, of a ship captain that said the same thing when he traveled down there. He traveled down to the tip of Argentina where it met Antarctica. And he talked about when these giants spoke, how it was terrifying. How it was something that made you want to run. I agree. I heard this man speak, and it was just something that just curdled your soul. The only reason I was not overly afraid is I knew I could outrun him at that time. At 17 years old, I was a linebacker in high school, so nobody that big could move that fast. But he'd make you want to, for sure. So that's my question about the Piri Reis map and the ships. There's no way, if the weather down there now was like it was back in 14 and 1500, these ships would have been able to survive the journey. There's no way. They wouldn't have been able to pack, first of all, they wouldn't have been able to pack enough fresh water. You see, here's another question. They wouldn't have been able to pack enough food or fresh water in these ships unless they were stopping all along the way. You see, what they would have had to have done is they would have had to, from where those ships were coming from, the Mediterranean, they would have had to come down the coast of Africa. and then make the journey across here, knowing when they got across here to Queen Maud Land, which is right here, that they could refill with food, refill with fresh water. They wouldn't have been able to bring enough for the journey. They could barely, at that time, when they made that map, at that time, they could barely pack enough into the ships to survive the journey from England to the colonies. Barely. And they had to jam the holds completely full. And by the time they got halfway there, most of the water was putrid and the food was foul. And children didn't survive the trips. Women barely survived. In fact, it was seen as bad luck to have women and children on anyway. That's why when this country was settled, during colonial times, the New World was all men. It was almost all men. Very, very, very few women because they couldn't survive the trip. It was too slow and you just couldn't. So imagine being able to take a trip somehow from here. You'd have to be sailing all the way down the coast and then basically come across from Africa and then probably go this way and then come around the tip of South America and then maybe come back from the tip of Brazil to Africa here and then back through the Straits and into the Mediterranean. Even ships, even in the Mediterranean, ships wrecked because of the storms. And the storms in the Mediterranean are nothing like the storms in the Atlantic. And the storms in the Atlantic are nothing like the storms down here. So how did multiple expeditions in those little 14th and 15th century ships, if it was the roaring 40s like it is now, how did they survive so many trips there and back to be able to make a map? Because it wasn't the roaring 40s. It wasn't. There was a land bridge. There was a huge land bridge, and it existed in medieval times. And only recently did this happen. They're completely wrong about the time. And we have a letter. We have a letter from a colonel. I'll give you the link to this so you can read it. But I'm going to read it for you one more time. We're 22 minutes in, so it's one more pound on the hog at this point, right? 6 July 1960. To Professor Charles H. Hapgood, Keene College. Dear Professor Hapgood, your request of evaluation of certain unusual features of the Piri-Reis Antarctic map of 1513 by this organization has been reviewed. The claim that the lower part of the map portrays the Princess Martha Coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, and the Palmer Peninsula is reasonable. We find that this is the most logical and in all probability the correct interpretation of the map. The geographical detail shown in the lower part of the map agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic Expedition of 1949. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. This part of Antarctica, ice-free. The ice cap in this region is now about a mile thick. We have no idea how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographical knowledge in 1513. To me, that's the beginning and end of it. For me, smoking gun. Those ships that made that map could have never survived the roaring 40s. Never. Never made it. They barely made it across the Mediterranean, barely made it across the Atlantic. They got smoked down here if this weather was like this. And the only thing that could have stopped the weather being like this down there is if this land bridge was in place. And that changes history. And it will. Maybe not in our lifetimes, but it will. So I'll leave it there. God bless. Thank you guys so much for the support. I very, very much appreciate it. It's making a huge difference. I wish I could tell you who. It's another female political commentator, conservative, of course, that is now getting pretty much tossed off. So $1, humbly. That's all I ask. God bless. Have a great rest of your week. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.